Okay, we're going to kind of start going over the very last thing that will be on your test, and that is binomial probabilities. And some of the problems you've even worked in the past, you'll now have an option of working them with a connector word or binomially. All of them cannot be worked binomially. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you and talk you through it. Okay, so the prefix bi, of course, means two, like a bicycle has two tires. So a binomial probability, one of the distinguishing characteristics is like the very first thing says two categories only. Well, think about it. When you take a test, either you pass or you fail. You know, in the world, you live or you die. You get things right, you get things wrong. So a lot of times, you know, you can separate all of your outcomes into two categories. Like I know there's 6 things on a die, but you could either say, well, I rolled a 2 or I didn't roll a 2. Okay, so the very first kind of condition for binomial probability is there can only be 2 categories. The second thing that's super important is the probabilities have to be consistent for the whole problem. So for instance, if your chance of getting question 1 right and you're guessing is 1 out of 3, then your chance of getting every question right has to be 1 out of 3. So it can't be 1 out of 3 one time and then 1 out of 5 another time. So your probabilities can't change anywhere in the problem. So you'll have 2 categories. Those probabilities have to be consistent for the whole time. Now, the other 2 conditions you don't really have to worry about. I'll take care of those. The other one is there's a fixed number of trials. In other words, there are 10 questions on the test, or there are 500 people. In other words, you can't say you play this game till you die. So you have to know how many trials there are. But that will be a problem for you. I'll make sure that that's the case. The other is the trials have to be independent. So what you guess on problem 1 won't change what you might or might not get on problem 2. And again, I'll kind of take care of that. So really the first 2 categories, the first 2 conditions actually are what you have to worry about. 2 categories only, and the probabilities have to be consistent throughout the problem. Now, when you glance down and see the formula, most people panic, but we're not going to panic. You know, when people panic, terrible things happen. Nobody, you know, gets trampled in math, so we're not going to panic. This right here is your formula, okay? But I do want you to notice that this beginning part should look real familiar to you, okay? We just finished getting totals. Do you see that this part right here of the formula really is just your formula for combinations? So that's why I kind of replaced this part of your formula with your formula for combinations, because that's a button on your calculator. Okay, now every time you work a problem, remember, if you want any partial credits, you have to have a P, and then in parentheses you have to have what you're trying to find the probability of. So once you've done that, then I want you to always label what your N, your X, your P, and your Q are for that problem. So remember what N is in every problem the whole semester. N's your total. All right, so N is your total here. How many trials are you doing? X is the number in the parenthesis. You'll see what I mean with an example, but I say with modifiers. Like if I say exactly 2, that's different than if I say at least 2 or at most 2. So that's why I say don't just glance at the number, make sure you take the modifiers with it. So N and X are just numbers, total, and then the number in parentheses is your X. Now remember, you have 2 categories. So if you have 2 categories, you have a probability for each of those categories. Well, if you've done what I told you, one of those categories is going to be written in the parenthesis. So P is the probability of the category in the parenthesis. It's got nothing to do with the number. It is the category only. And then Q is your probability of the other category. And the easiest way to get Q is just 1 minus P, because remember, P and Q are really complements of each other. Either you live or you don't live. In other words, you die. So let's kind of go work one so you can kind of see what I mean. All right, look at this example. All right, this example says you're completely unprepared for a test. I know this would never happen to you, but you know, just in case. And you have to guess at every answer. So there are 10 multiple choice questions on your test. You can pick A, B, C, D, or E for every one of them. So what I want to know is what's the probability that you get exactly 4 questions correct? So you're just guessing. You have no idea. So you can't like go, well, I know C's not working. You are literally just guessing A, B, C, D, or E on every question. So think about what happens when you do that. Well, either you get them right or you get them wrong. Okay. So that's two categories only. So that's the first condition. And the second condition that you have to check is the probability. So if you've got A, B, C, D, or E, when you're guessing on problem 1, what's your chance of getting it right? Well, do you see that your chance of getting it right would be 1 out of 5 because there are 5 things you can choose from and only one's right. So your chance of getting question 1 right is 1 out of 5. Your chance of getting question 7 right is still 1 out of 5. So for the whole test, your chance of getting any question correct is 1 out of 5. So that's what I mean by binomial. 2 categories only, and the probability's got to be the same. So it couldn't be like part of the test is true, false, and part of the test is multiple choice. Because if the first 5 questions were true, false, then your chance of getting, say, question 1 correct would be 1 out of 2 because you've only got 2 choices. And then if questions 5 through 10 were multiple choice with A, B, C, D, E, your chance of getting one of those right would be 1 out of 5. So your chance of getting a problem correct wouldn't be the same for the whole test. So you couldn't do binomial in that case. But in this case, you can because they're all multiple choice A, B, C, D, E choices. So remember what I said, you have to put a P, and in parentheses, you've got to find the probability of what you're trying to find. What's the probability that you get exactly 4 correct? So what's the probability I get 4 right or 4 correct? So your wording may differ from mine, but if you want any partial credit, you have to have a P and what you're looking for in the parentheses. As soon as you do that, I want you to write down N, X, P, and Q. Okay, so let's make sure we understand where I got these numbers. Remember, N is your total. So how many total things are you doing? You see that you're doing 10 guesses, 10 questions. So that's why N is 10. And then I told you the X was your number in the parentheses with the modifiers. So exactly 4. That's why X is just 4. All right. Now, either you get them right or you get them wrong. You get them correct or incorrect. So which category is in the parentheses? Correct. So P goes with that. So on any question, what's your chance of getting it right? Remember we said it was 1 out of what? 5, because there are 5 things, only one of those is right. And when you take 1 and divide by 5, that's where I got this 2/10. And then Q is 1 minus that. So 1 minus 2/10 is 8/10. Okay. So then here's my formula. I just copy it down and I filled in my N, my X, my P, and my Q. So N is 10. So that's why there's a 10 right here. There's my C for combinations. X is 4. So instead of X, I put a 4. My P is 2/10. So I put 2/10 in place of P. The superscript, the exponent is an X. So my X was 4. My Q is 1. My Q was 8/10. So in place of Q, I put 8/10. And then my N was 10 minus my X was 4. 10 minus 4. Now, what is 10 minus 4? 10 minus 4, of course, is 6. So that's how I got a 6 right there. Now, if you take your calculator, remember how you get to this. You would have to type in your 10, and then you'd have to go to your math key. Remember, you scroll over to probability and choose NCR. On mine, that's option 3. It should be option 3 on yours, hopefully. If not, just find it. Hit enter, and then the cursor's blinking. Remember, waiting for you to type in your X of 4. And when you hit enter, that's where I got the 210. Okay. So then I did 2/10 to the 4th power and got 16 10,000ths. Then I did 8/10 to the 6th power, and that's what came up on my screen. So I multiplied all 3 of those, and this is what was all the way across my screen. Now remember what I said, I want probability to 3 or 4 decimal places. So if I wanted to go to 4 decimal places, okay, then I've got to look at this number right here. So because it's bigger than 5, 5 or bigger, remember that one goes up. So that's why that 0 turned into a 1. So that's approximately my probability of getting exactly 4 questions right. Now, we're thinking better in terms of percent usually. So you see that's about an 8% chance that I'd get exactly 4 right, which means I would make a 40 on the test. So I don't advise just guessing. Okay, that's why we study. Okay, so let's go work a couple more and make sure that you're okay. All right, so here's another one. Let's make sure you can help me. All right, so this time, same kind of scenario. I'm completely unprepared for a test. I got 10 questions, and I want to know what's the probability that I missed them all. Now, when I wrote that down in words, I may have to change it a little bit to something I know. Now, what does miss them mean? Am I getting them right or am I getting them wrong? Well, say I'm getting them wrong. So that's why my category, you could put incorrect, whatever you want to put. Now, how many is all? Well, there were 10 questions, so all would be 10. So the probability of missing them all is basically saying, what's the probability that I get 10 wrong? Now, instead of putting 10 wrong, you might say 0 right. If you do that, then your N, X, P, and Q are going to be different from mine, but our answers should be the same. Okay, so what's that chance I got them all 10 wrong? So what's my total here? How many questions are on the test? Do you see that there are 10? Now, X is the number in the parenthesis. So what's my number of the parenthesis? Well, it's also 10. Now notice, X can never be bigger than N. They can match, and occasionally they will, but N's your total. You can't go above your total. So either N's going to be the same as X or N's going to be bigger than X all the time. Now, P is your chance of getting the category in the parentheses. So this time it's not right, it's wrong. So what's the chance that I guess and I get one wrong? Well, how many choices are there? Aren't there 5 choices? Okay, so if there are 5 choices, A, B, C, D, E, how many of those are going to be wrong? Do you see that 4 of them are going to be wrong? So if I take my calculator, that's going to be 8/10. Okay, and then remember, how do you get Q? 1 minus P. So if I say 1 minus 8/10, I get 2/10. Now I want you to notice something. All right. If I go back, maybe, on this one, my category in the parenthesis was correct. Okay. So my P was 0.8, my P was 0.2. Okay. But in the new one, remember the new one's the one I just did in blue, it's 0.8. So you've got to make sure you put your category because your category can change in the problem. All right. So be careful about that. So let's go up here, make sure we're good. So remember what I do. I have my C, my N is 10, and my X is 10. Okay, so I put my N and my X, my P, and this time is 8/10. Okay, my X up here is 10. And then my Q down here, go back to look, what's your Q? Your Q is 2/10. Okay, so my Q is 2/10. And then I have to do my N 10 minus my X 10. Okay, so remember what you do. You punch in 10 on your calculator, then you go to your math, you scroll over to probability, and you choose NCR and hit enter. And when you do, the cursor's blinking and wait for you to type in 10. So if you do your calculator, you do a combination of 10 things, taking 10 at the time. So freeze it and do it. All right, hopefully you did that. You froze it and got the answer, and you should have gotten 1. Okay. Now do 8/10 to the 10th power. And what I do, I get about 0.10737418, and it keeps going. Okay, I'm running out of room. Now this is going to be 2/10 to the 0 power. All right, so what that's going to give me is a 1. So I'm going to get that 0.107. Now that would make that go up to a 4 if I wanted to round. And then 2/10 to the 0 is a 1. So I get 0.1074. So that's my chance of missing them all. That's 10%. I got a 10% chance of just missing all of them. That's even more than my chance of getting 4 right. Okay. So do you understand? N's your total, X is your number in the parenthesis with modifiers, P is your category in the parenthesis, and Q is 1 minus P. Now, let me show you what I mean a little bit more about the categories kind of in the parenthesis. Okay, look at this one. Again, same thing, you're completely unprepared, 10 questions. I want to know the probability that you get at least one correct, at least one right. All right, so let's double check and make sure we understand how I got these numbers. So what's the probability that I get at least one correct? Now, what does at least one literally mean? It doesn't mean less than, least doesn't mean less than, least is saying that number or more. So at least one literally means 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, all the way up to 10 correct. So my category stays the same. Now notice what I could do. I could do a binomial problem with X being 1 and get an answer, and then start all over and do a binomial problem, let X be 2 and get an answer, and start all over. So do you see, I could do this formula back over here 10 different times and get 10 different answers. Now, what do you do with OR probabilities? That formula is on your sheet. Don't you add? So if you wanted to, you could work this problem 10 different times and add those 10 answers. And if you do that on your test and get it right, I will just salute you. I'm not going to do that though. So remember what we said on one of our videos. My first thought is, oh, that is too much trouble. And if I think that's too much trouble, the next thought that should pop into your head is maybe I could do 1 minus the probability of the complement. Now, sometimes you can't. Sometimes something is too much trouble and you just got to buckle down, dig deep, and do it. Okay, but if there's an easier way, I'd rather do the easier way. So I think maybe I could do complement. Let me write down what the complement is and see if that looks better. So what is the complement? So I'll go over here and go, okay, what's the complement? Now remember what complement is. Complement's everything in the sample space that's missing up here. So think about it. If you guess at 10 questions, how many might you get right? You might get none right, or 1, or 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, or 6, or 7, or 8, or 9, or 10. That's all the questions that you can get right. That's how many questions you could possibly get right. So that's my sample space. Well, if I delete everything there, the only thing left is 0. So that's my complement. So it's the probability of getting 0 correct. Now, if it said, what's the probability that you get at least 2 correct? Then I would have 2 or 3 or 4. So then my complement would be 0 or 1. But again, I'd rather do 2 things and add them than 8 things and add them. Okay. So write down what the complement is and see if that's any better. All right, here it is. So I start over. So I'm going to start all over. I'm working a new problem. So I have to write down my N, my X, my P, and my Q. Remember, N's my total, so my total is 10. X is the number in the parenthesis, so that's 0. P is my category in the parenthesis. Now my category is back to correct. And remember, I've got a 1 out of 5 chance of guessing and getting it right, which is 2/10. And remember, how did I get this 8/10? 1 minus P is how you get Q, and 1 minus 2/10 is 8/10. So I went back to my formula that I had on these other pages. Remember, my N, my N and my X, my P to the X, and my Q to the N minus X. So I substituted in my N of 10 and my X of 0. Now, if you do this on your calculator, you get a 1. If you do this on your calculator, you get another 1. All right, and then of course, 10 minus 0 is 10. 8/10 to the 10 power is this number right here. Now, remember, I'm not finished. This is the answer to this, but that's not what they asked me. They wanted the probability that I get at least 1 correct. So 1 minus the probability of the complement. So what's the probability of that complement? It's that number right there. So I plugged it in, and then 1 minus that number is this number. That's my final answer. So if you've got modifiers, make sure you put modifiers with it. All right. Now, the lovely part is that this formula is built into your calculator. So the calculator will do all the work for you if you want it to. Well, here's how you let the calculator do it. You have to find the binomial distribution. And so here's where you find it. The distribution is under second theirs. So on your calculator, all right, on that fourth row where it says theirs, you're going to have to hit the second button first. When you do, this menu pops up and you don't see what you need, but there's a down arrow. Remember that down arrow means scroll down. We got more. So you keep scrolling down until you find binomial PDF and binomial CDF. So we got to make sure we know when to use which one. You're going to use binomial PDF when you have one number only next to X, like up here, just 4, one number only. Now, when do you use the C one? You're going to use the C one if you have a list. So it might be, okay, what if I asked you, what's the probability that you get at most 3 wrong? Okay, still 10 questions. Do you understand that N would be 10 and X? Now remember, most doesn't mean more than, it means that's your top, that's your max. So at most 3 would be 0 or 1 or 2 or 3. So that's what I mean by a list, as in more than one number. 2 numbers is still a list. But here's the other kicker. That list has to start with 0. If that list doesn't start with 0, you cannot use that key. Okay? So P is when you have one number only. C is when you have more than one number, but the list has to start with 0. On the next video, we'll talk about what we do when the list doesn't start with 0. Okay? And then once you decide, you've got the order that you type the things in the parentheses matter. So if I was going to do this one, remember my P, since it says wrong, would be 0.8, and my Q would be 0.2. So because I've got a list, I would go down to second theirs, and I would keep scrolling down until I found binomial CDF, and I would hit enter, and the parenthesis is open and the cursor's blinking. So it wants me to type in my N, which is 10, and then a comma. The comma is above the 7 on your calculator. So type the comma. Then P would be 0.8 and another comma. You got to type those commas in. And again, that comma is above your 7 key. And then my X. Now, the X is the number in the parenthesis, okay? But my problem is I got a bunch of numbers. Well, if it's only one number, you type that one number in. But if you've got a list, you type the biggest number in. Because it's going to start with 0 if you use this C key. It stands for cumulative, okay? So you would type in a 3. You would close your parenthesis. That's above your 9 key, and you would hit enter. And I get about, this comes up on my screen, 8.64358. 4, and it's got an E, and it's got a -4. Now that's in scientific notation. What that literally means is this number times 10 to the -4. So if you've got a E -4, that means move this decimal 4 places to the left because it's negative. So I go 1, so I'm going to put some zeros, go 2, 0, 3, 0, 4. So I'd get 0.000, and then I would round to 9 because that number is 5 or bigger. So that would be my answer. Okay. So on the next video, I'm going to use the calculator a lot more and give you some practice, but make sure you understand the P one is when you have one number next to X, and the C one is when you have a list, as in more than one number next to X, and the list has to start with 0. All right. If you need any help, you need to come see me. All right. Shoot me an email. We can meet in person or by Zoom. I hope that's helpful for you.